So metallic threads are just a complete nightmare to cross stitch with, right? Well, maybe not. Because not all metallic threads are created equal, and some of them are actually quite nice to stitch with. Hi there, stitchy friends. I'm Kat from Catkin and Lily, bringing you the best cross-stitch tips, tricks and tutorials so you can get the most joy from your cross-stitching, even with metallic thread. So in my previous video, I shared some tips to make cross-stitching with metallic threads way easier. So if you haven't seen that, go back and take a look. But which metallic threads you use can also make a really big difference. So today I want to talk about the different brands and types of metallic threads, and the pros and cons of each, and of course, I'll share which is my favourite. Let's take a look. I'm going to start with some of the DMC options because there are a couple. We'll start with the most common, and this is the DMC Light Effects thread. Unfortunately, it's probably the most difficult to work with. It's a 6-stranded thread, so you'll be pulling out individual strands and using either 1 or 2 strands to stitch with. Now, the metallic finish is, as you can see, absolutely beautiful, but oh my word, the knotting and tangling is crazy. And it frays so badly too. So I have to be honest, it's not much fun to stitch with, even if you use all my tips to make it easier. The next DMC option is the Etoile thread, and again it's a 6-stranded thread that you would separate out individual strands to use. But it's not really a proper metallic thread, it just has the metallic threads running through the cotton. So you get a really lovely subtle sparkle, but not quite the same wow factor as a full-on metallic thread. On the plus side, this means it's barely any harder to stitch with than regular thread. It's a little bit harder to get really neat stitches because you can probably see it's quite fluffy, but it's pretty easy to work with. The final DMC option is DMC Diamant thread. And it's not dissimilar to the Light Effects, but it's nowhere near as unruly to stitch with. The difference is that it comes as a single strand and you stitch with it as this is. You don't pull it apart. And this single strand is considered equivalent to 2 strands of cotton thread or 2 strands of Light Effects thread. It's a little bit more wiry feeling than the Light Effects, and I have to be honest, I just don't really love the way the stitches look, and I don't like the coverage of the fabric. On the plus side, it doesn't actually tangle too badly. Now I should say there is also Diamant Grande, which is even thicker than this and equivalent to 4 strands of cotton thread. So this isn't really one that I could see you using very often for a cross stitch. Another very different option is to use blending filament, which is a really fine strand that you combine with regular thread to add a little sparkle. So this ends up kind of like the DMC Etoile thread. The 2 examples I have here is some Kreinik thread and some Au Ver soie, and they're very similar. So you would take your strand, and you can see I've combined it in with some regular thread, and then you stitch with this just to give a little bit of extra sparkle. Now, this is a little bit fiddlier to do, because obviously you have to combine the threads, but it's really great for adding a little bit of silver thread, for example, in with any colour of regular threads in your pattern, just to add that extra bit of sparkle. So, like the Etoile threads, it's not particularly hard to stitch with, although you might want to, the filament does fray a little bit at the ends, so you can often end up chopping off quite a bit at the end where it just got too tatty to stitch with. And sometimes the filament kind of disappears into the cotton thread as you stitch, and you lose some of the sparkle. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. At least I think so. Metallic braid is used exactly as it comes, so a bit like the DMC Diamant that we saw earlier, but it's actually braided. And it's available in different weights of thread, ranging from the very finest number 4 to the chunkiest number 32. Now, not all of them will actually specify the weight of the thread in those numbers, but a lot of them do. And a number 8 braid is twice the thickness of a number 4, a number 12 is 3 times the thickness of a number 4, and so on. So you can pick the weight of the braid that you want, depending on the fabric count you're using and how good a fabric coverage you'd like. I find that a number 4 braid is ideal for 16 or 18 count Ada, and although the coverage is slightly less good on a 14 count Ada, I was still happy with it, and I found using a number 8 braid felt too chunky. So I've got quite a few brands here that I've tried, and I'm going to start with my favourite, and that's the Rainbow Gallery Treasure Braid. Now you've got the standard treasure braid, which is roughly equivalent to a number 8, and then you've got the petite treasure braid, which is roughly equivalent to a number 4. So that's the thinner of the two. Now this petite treasure braid is absolutely amazing. A single strand of this looks really quite nice and even against stitches of regular thread. I could use it with my preferred size 26 needle. It does fray a little bit at the end sometimes, but nothing really bad. And it doesn't tangle even at longer lengths and even without using thread conditioner. So it's actually just really nice to stitch with. It's really lovely and soft. And it does also have that proper metallic finish. Now I found the treasure braid, the standard one, was just a little bit too chunky looking. It does fray more easily at the ends, and I did have to use a size 24 needle to be able to use it. So on to the Kreinik braid, and I found that this one was really quite similar to the petite treasure braid. It's very, very fractionally heavier weight. It is a number 4 braid. It's a tiny bit scratchier in texture and a little bit more prone to tangling, but it's a pretty close second. And then I tried the Au Ver Soie Tresse braid, and this one is a little bit chunkier. It's a number 8 braid, so again I found the stitches were just a little bit too bulky looking. It's quite nice to stitch with, quite soft, doesn't fray too much, doesn't tangle, but it's just a little bit too bulky looking. And then a latecomer option here that I only tried recently is actually the Anchor Metallic. And again, it's really lovely and soft, has a beautiful sparkle. It was really nice to work with. Again, I just found it a little bit too chunky. So I found these braids a fantastic alternative to metallic threads for adding a little bit of sparkle to your cross stitch. And none of them were awful to stitch with, but I definitely preferred the thinner number 4 braids, and the petite treasure braid was absolutely my favourite, hands down. Now this is all well and good if you have a pattern that you just want to swap a regular thread for a touch of sparkle. So for example on this pattern, these polka dots, I could pick any colour sparkly thread to use for those and it would look lovely. But what do you do if you have a pattern that calls for a specific metallic thread and you would rather use a different one? Well, for me it would depend on the design. If I felt that using the exact colour or colours was integral to the design, then I'd probably use the called for threads, even if that was DMC Light Effects. And I'd just use every single one of my tips to make it easier. If it was a pattern with just 1 or 2 metallic colours, and it wouldn't matter if the colour was a little different, then I would look for a petite treasure braid that seemed like a good colour match. Or maybe a Kreinik number 4 braid. The good news is that these two brands come in a huge range of colours, so it wouldn't be too hard to find a good option. If you just want to swap between the different DMC options, then it's actually very easy to do, because the shade numbers are consistent. So for this DMC Diamant, that's D415, you would swap to E415 for the Light Effects, or C415 for the Etoile. But the colour palette for these options is much more limited, so you may find trouble in swapping between them. Wow, that was a lot of sparkle for one video, wasn't it? Now I realise I might have missed some brands and types of metallic threads out there, but it would be pretty impossible for me to cover everything in one video. And of course, if you have a favourite, then I'd love to know in the comments. If you found this video helpful, then do give it a like, because that will help more people get to see it. And if you don't want to miss any of my future videos with more helpful tips and tricks, then click that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching.